the Bentley?
Benny always used buses in London, but he loved cars. And at the end of 1952 or early 53, he and Hitchcock decided that morning they were both going to buy a Bentley, one each. And they went to it wasn't with Rolls-Royce then, they went to Bentley's in Los Angeles, which was a very posh establishment with British staff. And frankly, both of them looked as though they dressed from Oxfam. And they walked in and said, "Can we have a look at this car over here?" And the assistant said, "Oh, ho, don't you wish you could afford a thing like that?" Now, Benny didn't mind, but Hitchcock was very sensitive about being snobbed against, if there's such a word.
Yeah.
And he was furious, and he walked out. And Benny really wanted a Bentley, but he walked out with Hitch, and he shouted back, "You've just seen $20,000 walk out your door." And Hitchcock was so upset, he went home, and Benny went into another classic car place and bought the Elvis, which I've still got.
No.
The famous Elvis, yes.
And is it still running?
Yes.
All up and running?
It's not so easy to drive or go anywhere with, but
no.
That's how he got the Elvis. And then years later, when he met and married me, he decided that he was going to have a Bentley, only because he couldn't drive on the left. He bought it for me. He was very dangerous. He tried driving and he started on the left and ended on the right. And he nearly got us killed going over a humpback bridge on the right with something coming the other way. And he never drove again in England, but he loved the buses.
Howard, have you been on a bus with Benny Herrmann?
Well, he used to visit Liz Keys at London Management, which was my agent and his agent, and from there was a bus stop, and he would always stand and wait for a bus back to Regent's Park, and I would say to him, "Well, why don't you bring your car? You've got the wonderful Bentley Continental." No, he said, "I can get a bus. I prefer a bus." So that was it. So I didn't go on the bus with him, but I...
Yeah. You probably watched him get on one.
My last memory of him is actually I myself getting on a bus, and no, I got in a taxi, actually. We'd both been to Liz, and I got in a taxi, and it was pouring with rain, and I went past the bus stop, and he's standing there, it's pouring with the rain, without an umbrella, like, "I'm going to stand here till the bus comes." I thought that was very typical of him.
Did he like the all human life was there on a bus, or was it, what attracted him to it?
It got him where he wanted to go.
Oh, right.
And he was fascinated because they had no such thing in California.
Yeah.
And oh no, and it was cheap. He liked that. He wasn't mean ever.
No.
And if he was going anywhere else, he'd have a chauffeur and her car, but he adored the buses.
Kind of magic there. As you say, particularly if you've come from California, where a bus will arrive, I think, as you said, about once a week. You know?
Oh, and I must tell you, he was always supposed to be on a diet. So I stole his cash out of his pockets so that he couldn't go buying ice creams and things. So he didn't often have the money for a taxi because I'd taken it. And in those days, you didn't have cards. There was no such thing. So I did it on purpose because he'd buy burgers and ice creams and everything, and I was trying to work out the beautiful diet. So he had enough money for a bus fare, but he didn't always have enough money for a taxi. And one day, for the same reason, he went to the bakery in Camden Town and asked for a loaf of bread and counted out his money on the counter, and they didn't know who he was. And they said, "Oh, there isn't enough money there." And he came home and said, they were so nice. One lady said, "Let's cut the loaf in half for him." And the other said, "Oh, are we allowed to do that?" And the first one said yes, and he brought home half a loaf because that's all the money he had. And nobody knew who he was.
And this from the man who scored Citizen Kane
Yeah.
and right through to Taxi
Yeah.
Driver. You make him sound like quite a naughty kid, and that's something I'd like to come back to. But I want to say, as a huge fan of Bernard Herrmann's music, I'm absolutely pinching myself now to be sat with Norma Herrmann and Howard Blake, because that puts me as close, I think, as I can get to Bernard Herrmann. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to us in connection with this Spitfire release. Norma, I'd love to just go back to your initial meeting with Bernard Herrmann, because there are some very funny stories about really what could be considered a pretty gruff chat-up routine from him. He didn't come across as a super charming man. How was your first collision with him, if I can put it that way?
Now, when I first met him, I had been warned about him. I was going to a New Year's Eve party in the centre of London. New Year's Eve, terrible snowy weather. And they had said, oh, we've got this American coming and he can be a bit rude, so forgive him in advance. And I thought this was a bit funny. I didn't speak to him at the party, but it was snowing so much that taxi drivers were taking pity on people going the same way. And we were going the same way. And we got in the taxi and he said, "You young women, you're so thin. You're like skinned rabbits. Doesn't anybody ever give you a decent meal?" And I thought, this is a bit odd. And he said, "If you come out to lunch tomorrow, I'll give you a decent meal." And I thought that was funny. He could have said, "I'm divorced and I'm lonely in London." No, none of that. I was a skinned rabbit and he was going to give me a decent meal.
What a chat-up line.
Yeah, but I went, didn't I?
Yes, you did go.
And then I went somewhere else and somewhere else, and that was it.
I don't know whether we'd call it a first date, but how did you first come to be with Bernard Herrmann and to work with Bernard Herrmann?
Well, in 1967, I was signed up by a composer agent called Liz Keys, who represented some very distinguished composers like William Walton and Malcolm Arnold and Richard Rodney Bennett and Bernard Herrmann. And shortly after that, she said, "Would you like to meet Bernard Herrmann? He's in town and he'd like to meet us at Fortnum and Mason." So I went along there, and I think the first thing he said to me, he says, "Do you know anywhere I can get a theremin in this town?" I said, I don't actually. I know what a theremin is, but I've never seen one. In fact, there wasn't one in town. So he said, "I want to use a theremin, something I'm working on, and what can we do?" So I said, "Well, I happen to have just bought the very first mini Moog off Dr. Robert Moog.
Yeah.
And it actually does exactly the same thing as the theremin. It's got a ribbon controller on it." And he said, "I don't believe it'll sound anything like it." I said, "Well, you can come and listen to it if you like." So later he came back to my flat in Hammersmith, and I demonstrated the Moog synthesizer to him.
And he was hooked straight away?
Yeah, and he used it thereafter on the films where he wanted it, mostly the horror films.
Yeah, and science fiction as well?
Science fiction.
Or was that theremin on?
I don't think he ever managed to find a theremin, but the Moog synthesizer not only does that, but did lots of other things as well. It's a very adaptable instrument.
Yeah. I mean, did you find him incredibly open-minded to new technology in a sense that perhaps inspired by his days in radio? I mean,
he was a genius at thinking of combinations of instruments to produce the effects that he wanted. And I remember on Twisted Nerve, and he showed me some of the score, and there's like nine bass clarinets and 3 contrabassoons, and so he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think it's going to sound very dark." He says, I want it to sound very dark. So he knew exactly what, but I mean, his lineups of orchestra, you won't find them in any guide to orchestration book ever written. Very unique combinations of instruments to produce what he wanted.
And he was very outspokenly critical of composers who decided to use orchestrators, I think, because he felt orchestration was absolutely part of his craft. I mean, he literally says they're crap in one interview.
Well, he was very outspoken,
everything.
Full stop. No, he said what he thought. I agree with him about that. I personally also always orchestrated my own scores, but there are a great many composers who don't. They don't have that gift. So I think Bernard had that gift, and he used it. And so he couldn't understand why other composers wouldn't do the same.
Norma, you've once described Bernard as rather like a toffee apple.
Yes, there's no denying that. I spent a lot of my time with him keeping the peace. And trying to stop him insulting people. And but it was always about music. Always, because his standards were so high. And it sometimes got very embarrassing for me, because I might be friends with the wife. And I might think, what am I going to say to them? Yes, he could be very, very abrupt, but in 2 minutes it could be forgotten as well. But it was always about standards in music. And he couldn't tolerate ignorance or arrogance about music. And where you and I might sit by a pool reading a paperback, he would read a score.
Right.
And on a long car journey or plane journey, he would read a score and just read it. And, and I think a lot of his success in the film business was because he was so deeply educated in music of all kinds and all periods, that he knew what an orchestra could do, and he knew what emotions and music could evoke.
He was such a fierce proponent of people pursuing an individual style. I mean, he hated the idea of fads and fashions in music, from what I can gather. And in film, that's very often subject to fads and fashions, and also you have to really work and compromise with other people. So it's really interesting that he found himself in film. And was that also a source of great frustration for him?
You know, he had the row with Hitchcock about Torn Curtain.
Yeah.
He would never listen anyway to anything a director or producer said. That is the beginning. I would do the film or I will not do the film. And if he's doing the film, the first time they hear anything about any of it is on the day of the recording. And he would never listen to any suggestion. A famous suggestion was, for instance, in Psycho, see what you can do with it, but no music in the shower. Right. We know about that.
Yeah.
But the row with Hitchcock over the Torn Curtain was because he was asked to write a pop song. And he did his best for the film. And if it needed one, he could write one. He once got one in the hit parade for a film called something about Jenny. He could write a song, but he did what the film needed, and that caused the whole breakup with Hitchcock.
Did he ever really get over that bust up with Hitchcock?
No. All those years, he was very upset, because in a way, Hitchcock was a mentor for him. And they were intimate. They had dinner together, they washed up together, they went places together. And I think he always wished they could get back together as friends. It has been written and said that they never spoke again. They did. It was very brief and it wasn't cordial. When Benny and I got married, we went back to LA and we went to Universal, and wanted to introduce, I think he was trying to make an overture. And he took me to introduce my new bride, which he left me, to Hitchcock. And Hitchcock answered the door. It was only a tiny little suite of offices, which upset Benny because Hitchcock used to have an empire down there. And he came to the door and Benny said, "I'd like you to meet my new bride." And Hitchcock was cool and polite, but cool and not warm. And he didn't ask us in, but fairly polite. And that was it. And it was very brief. And we went away, and I didn't care about meeting Hitchcock. And I think Benny was a bit disappointed it hadn't been warmer. And but that was after Torn Curtain.
Yeah.
And it was quite obvious that Hitchcock didn't want to know anymore. But then Benny was very angry, and he was saying, "Look at this, there's only 2 parking places there. He used to have an empire. How small he's become. Everybody used to respect Hitch, and look now, he's in that miserable little office with 2 parking spaces instead of an empire. Look what they've done to him." But it has been said that Hitchcock did it to himself by getting rid of Benny.
Yes. But that story is interesting in the way that it reveals perhaps something that you can overlook, which is that a very warm heart in Bernard Herrmann, even at a time when he could have been still simmering with anger at Hitchcock. He's actually saying he's furious on his behalf.
He was furious with Universal.
Yeah.
He was very angry at Universal for turning Hitchcock into a has-been with a tiny little office.
Yeah.
Instead of he had an empire.
After you'd shown him the Mini-Moog, did you then go and play that for him in sessions for his films?
I did.
Yeah.
I played on an album of his big sci-fi pictures, which was recorded in Kingsway Hall.
Right.
On which I played Hammond organ and Moog synthesizer and Celeste and harpsichord and anything else.
Yeah.
Going. I must have played it on Twisted Nerve because I actually, having said that he got very angry about arranging, he actually did ask me to do some arranging on that, which I did. And he said a wonderful remark. He said, film is a mosaic art.
Yeah.
He said, and so every part of it, nobody has to say. Everybody's contributing their own bit.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you to contribute a bit. Does that make sense? I said, that's fine with me. So that's how we got over that one.
Right, yeah, that deals with that.
Yeah. But coming back to being rude to the orchestra, and which he certainly was, and also on Twisted Nerve, I was sort of, I think at that time, sort of linked to what was going on in London. And I'd worked a bit with Henry Mancini. And I told him, about Henry Mancini using 4 bass flutes in unison. And he said, what the hell is a bass flute? And he didn't know it. But so I said, well, they go an octave below a concert flute. He says, that sounds great. I said, well, there are only things, they need a lot of puff, because they're about this long. And, they've really got to blow. And he said, I could use that for this opening theme. I said, well, you've got to put some breaths in it, otherwise they run out of... He said, don't tell me how to write for the flute. Well, I'm sorry, you just said you've never met this instrument. Anyway, we get there, and it's 9:30 in the morning at Shepperton, and it was a very new instrument at that time.
Right.
And the 4 guys had probably hired them from Booz and Hawkes or somewhere. And they hadn't warmed up. And he'd written a great long tune with no breath in it. So I said, exactly what I said, don't do that. So they started off and they played this. It sounded terrible. It sounded terrible. So he paused and he looked up and he said, I could make a better sound than that by farting. And
Charming.
there was a terrible hush in the studio, and I said to Benny, you're not going to ingratiate yourself with the orchestra if you talk to them like that. Be a bit nice. He said, don't tell me how to talk to an orchestra. I said, I'm telling you how to talk. So we had this sort of relationship.
A bit of a ding-dong.
Can I tell you about Howard Blake?
Yeah. Well, there's a wonderful quote from you where you said that you liked Howard Blake before everyone liked Howard Blake. I love that.
Yeah. Now, he was a slip of a boy, young lad, and it amazed me that Benny, he thought you were wonderful, because Benny had no tolerance at all for anybody younger, less experienced than he was, and in some cases, though not yours, less well-educated. No patience, no tolerance at all. And any young person he ever had to work with lasted 2 minutes and often went away in tears. And he thought this Blake was wonderful. He said you would go far, and you went far, didn't you? But I don't know, do you think it's because you answered him back?
Yes. I mean, I've always stood up for myself. I come from quite a hard beginning.
Right.
And, you know, nobody's going to put me down. So, but I loved Benny from the start.
Yeah.
And we got on well, but he knew what he was talking about. But I, from the perspective I had at that time, I knew what I was doing too. So we could give as good as we got.
Yeah, he wanted to take down people who were above their station, but he was actually very warm to. I mean, he was such a, he was so encouraging and so welcoming of new music, and did a lot in those radio years, didn't he, to expose and get new music played?
Well, he was very helpful to me, in fact, because I, at that time, when I was working mostly as a session musician, as a keyboard player, and I was doing a bit of work, and he said, do you write seriously? I said, yes, I do. And I'd written an orchestral piece, Movement for Orchestra, symphonic piece, which nobody was interested in. And he said, I'd like to see it. So I took this score to it and to him. And next time I saw him, he said, you write really well. Have the BBC played this? I said, they're not interested. He said, that's crazy. It's brilliant. So he then actually spoke to, he was a great friend of Laurie Johnson, who was at that time writing The Avengers. And Laurie wanted to, he'd been offered a film in Hollywood, and he wanted to go over there and give up The Avengers. He wanted somebody to take over writing some episodes of The Avengers. And he asked Benny if he'd like to do them. And Benny said, no, I wouldn't do them. But he said, you've got a boy playing piano for you who could do it, and his name's Howard Blake. So he gave that job, which was, that time, The Avengers was the biggest TV show in the whole world.
Yeah, of course.
Benny gave that job to me. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that, no.
And really, that was an amazing jump.
Yeah. It's indicative of that, of a real warmth as a humanity. Going back to the toffee apple, however tough and difficult the exterior was, there are lots of stories that reveal that warmth.
I'll tell you another story of him, which sort of reveals the sort of person he was. That he asked me if I would play on the film The Sisters, and I played Moog on that synthesizer and other things. And it's a very horrible subject, as you may know. And I'm sitting and I'm watching it, and I'm there, and it comes to the coffee break, and Ben is we're in quite a small studio, and Benny says, "What do you think?" And I said, it's a pretty horrible subject, Benny. I said, do you really think you ought to be doing a thing like this? And instead of, I thought he was going to say, mind your own goddamn business.
Right.
Instead of which, he started crying.
Right.
And he said, I just need to work, Howard. I just need to work. You're right, but I want to work. And that shows him. He was on the edge a lot of the time. And he just wanted to do stuff.
Yeah.
And he wanted to always write great things.
Yeah.
But underneath, just under the surface, he was a real softie.
Oh, yes. There was a period when he was not in demand. And we used to go back and forth from LA to London about 4 times a year. And we normally went between Christmas and New Year's Eve. And the first few years, we arrived there, and there were that many invitations for New Year's Eve. And then one year, we did the same thing, and we got no invitations for New Year's Eve. And I said, what's happened? And he said, no, I haven't got a film. And in LA, if you haven't got a film, nobody invites you anywhere because they think the unemployment will rub off on them. Right. And he was also, when we first used to go, there used to be lots of phone calls saying, oh, are you available for this, that, the other? And it may be a half-hour cowboy film or a detective thing. And there was nothing going. And he rang Lionel Newman, who was a musical director of the studio, the brother of Alfred Newman, and said, oh, have you got anything going? I'm over here for a few months. What's on the cards? And Lionel Newman said, sorry, Benny, we've decided to run with the kids. And he was so upset and furious and paced up and down, run with the kids, run with the kids. And then, of course, not very long after, when he'd been taken up by Scorsese and was being pursued by Spielberg and done this with Brian Palmer, who should ring him up and say, when are you available, when are you available? But Lionel Newman. And I was there and I saw Benny shaking his shoulders with laughter and he said, I've decided to run with the kids. Put the phone down.
But you can just imagine how much satisfaction that gave him. I mean, forget the job. Just he must have. It's like he was storing that up and then had the perfect moment to say that line back to someone.
He wasn't in big demand when I met him.
Yeah. Was it around the Truffaut? Was it Fahrenheit 451?
He was with Truffaut.
Yeah.
Truffaut. He'd done a couple of things with Truffaut. Truffaut was still interested in him. But Truffaut wasn't massive box office.
Right. There's a lovely line from Truffaut, actually. He says at one point he thanks Herrmann for humanizing his film in Fahrenheit 451. And I think it's really interesting that there's a certain nostalgia to that score, which I find a really, an interesting term to use with Bernard Herrmann, because famous as he was for scores that really unearthed sort of psychosis and pain and anxiety, he was capable of writing with incredible kind of warmth and humanity. And it was very important to him that all music had a human drive, wasn't it?
Now, I must tell you here, Herrmann was a romantic, deeply, deeply romantic. The fact that he's best known for Psycho and things like that is by the by. He was romantic. I think he once said his own favourite score of his was a thing called Ghost of Mrs Muir that not many people have heard of, and Vertigo, which was romantic, and that's where he felt he belonged at heart.
Yeah.
Though there is an art in scaring people to death, and he was good at it, but he was a romantic.
Yeah, yeah. You know, when you were sat playing for Herrmann, What were you thinking? Were you thinking about this composer? What innovations could you see? What differences were coming to light?
He was actually taking the view that the film was the music should reflect each shot. The music should be a psychological commentary, or it should work with the film, and that you're not trying to make a name for yourself as a great tunesmith.
Yes,
and so
yeah.
in that sense, I would say he was an innovator. Bernard Herrmann coming in is saying we can learn from what's going on in contemporary serious music.
Yes.
We learn from Schoenberg and Stravinsky and so on,
Yeah.
and put that all in, which is.
Then you get the sounds of things
Yes.
like Psycho. Yeah.
So Benny was certainly in that school of thinking. Or created that school of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, if it's often said that Psycho is perhaps one of the most, or the shower scene in Psycho, which as we know almost didn't happen, but it's one of the most famous film music moments, and yet really it's a kind of sound world and a gesture more than a tune that people could then hum. Isn't
What he always said was, I'm not really as interested in what you're seeing as I'm telling you what you're thinking.
Right.
I want to tell you what you should be thinking. And he often gave the example of the girl in Psycho driving along in the car and said she could be going to the supermarket, she could be picking the kids up from school, she could be going to work or anything, but I'm going to tell you that something terrible is going to happen.
Yeah.
And he said, that's what my music is all about. And he was never interested in making an interesting pop tune or song.
No, no.
Ever.
One day I asked Benny about the shower scene in Psycho, and I said, that sound, which is created merely by violins, I said, it's so terrifying. I said, how many violins did you use, Benny? And he said, 90. I said, don't exaggerate. 90 violins, I'm telling you. And I think maybe it was true. And I think because he would have had, at that time, the string sections in Hollywood were fantastic.
Yeah.
Mostly because so many people had come from Europe. all the great leaders of all the great orchestras in Europe were all working in Hollywood. So when you got a string section there, boy, did you get one.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible that there were 45 violins in his studio, and he overdubbed it or something like that, because no attempt to re-record it has worked. And I think it is actually the sound of 90 violins playing unison at a very high level, which is absolutely terrifying.
Muted as well, I think.
No, not muted. I wouldn't.
Right.
No, I wouldn't say so. No,
Right.
they're playing flat out with a lot of scrape on it. It's terrifying sound.
Yeah.
Once we were, I think it was something on the radio we were listening to about Herrmann music. He and I listening together. And somebody said, a Psycho score is all based on birds of prey because Norman Bates is eating peanuts and stuffing birds and things. And it's all about birds of prey. And I said, oh, isn't that silly? And then he said, he could be right. How do we know? It could possibly be. And he said, and how do we know, as if it came from somewhere else than him?
Yeah, that's interesting, putting it outside of himself almost, yeah. Was that interest in some of the studio techniques and electronic music, do you think that's something he got partly from working in radio?
He played the violin, first of all, and the first thing he did was to form a string orchestra in New York as a conductor. And so... And he at that time, he would have studied all the serious contemporary classical music. And I think the fact that his education as a musician was then working in radio with Orson Welles and other people, that I don't think he had any guidelines about what he should use. And I said, what did you use to, first of all, how many radio shows did you do with Orson Welles? He said, 500. I said, no, I don't believe that. But, okay, 500. What did you score it for? He said, I scored it for strings and one vibraphone. That's all I ever used, which might be true, might well be true. But he would decide, he wasn't listening to anybody else's view on what you should have been using. I mean, people mostly say you've got to use, you know, a bit of percussion and a harp and a 3 woodwind. Bernie would say, so he knew about string orchestra and string sounds, and he knew about modern music and the sort of music that was being written by people like Ligeti, maybe, certainly by Bartók, and Stravinsky at that time. And so I think the fact is he didn't grow up in Hollywood, whereas most of the people in Hollywood are growing up from that American tradition. He then happens to be taken along with the whole Orson Welles repertory company who've made Citizen Kane. They exported the whole thing to Hollywood to work in the RKO studios. He wasn't changing to Hollywood. He was there. He was going to carry on doing exactly as he'd been working with Orson in New York. So I think that's why you have this sudden ability to do something in a new way.
He seems to have this knack of, however difficult or discordant the music is, he insists that it has this kind of beating humanity, and that seems to be, that to me is one of the reasons why he's such an extraordinary composer, even when he's doing, as I say, quite challenging material. You can hear the kind of the anxiety, the reality, the humanity in it.
Benny did suffer from quite a lot of anxiety himself.
Certainly.
And it was in him that he was this person, he felt in many ways that the world was against him, and he took criticism he was hurt very, very much by any sort of criticism.
He pretended that he never read critics.
Right.
He told people, never, I wouldn't dream of it. What do they know? Why should I bother? Never read them, never read them. And of course, after he died, we found little packs of cuttings in here and there. Of course, he read them. And of course, he'd be hurt by them. But he would worry if he got criticism from his peers or his equals, but not from people he thought were his inferiors. So that was different.
I mean, that pain, that anxiety, that's part of the romantic ideal, isn't it? I mean, the romantic view that love is tinged with anxiety and pain and fear and paranoia.
Yeah.
And these things seem to have fueled him quite a lot. I mean, maybe he wouldn't have been able to do what he did without some of that.
Yes, well, later in his life, last 5 or 6 years, he was told to take a blood pressure pill. His blood pressure was always, they said, we don't know how you're walking around like this.
Right.
And doctors said that to him. And he was told to take a pill the way a lot of people do nowadays, automatically. And he took it for a couple of days and he said, I'm not myself, I can't compose. And I think it calmed him down, and he didn't want to be calm, did he? Why should he be calm when he could be otherwise?
Yeah.
Calm wasn't the thing he wanted to be.
But when you work in Hollywood, people aren't talking about this film anxiety within themselves, saying, I've got this is a horror movie, I have to do something like that. This is just a job. I think the problem with Bernie coming from a New York background and from a classical music, I think when he wrote his score, that's him expressing his own anxiety.
Yeah.
I think that's what you get in Psycho.
Yeah.
It's so frightening because it's actually, Bernie is feeling his whole anxiety about being not by love the world, he might be killed. You feel it in his music. Whereas if you actually talk in Hollywood, nobody's talking like that.
No.
They're saying, you know,
Yeah,
you've
do
got
a
to
bit
write
like
a
that.
dark score, it's got to do the job.
Yeah.
And I can see that Benny would not fit it. He fitted much better into a literary in England where people are saying, I really feel this, I'm doing it because I believe in it.
Yeah.
And so I think you see a serious composer expressing himself in the medium of film, but at the same time expressing a genuine angst that he himself possessed.
He often felt under-recognised, and I know, was that connected to conducting and composing outside the movies, or was it to do with the movies?
I happened to be in your house in Regent's Park on the day that they were going to choose the next conductor for the London Symphony Orchestra. I happened to be there.
I bet he went mad.
And he said, you know, they've got this goddamn asshole called Andre Previn. What the hell does he know about conducting?
Oh, he didn't like Previn,
I
did he?
said, come on, Benny, you can't talk about... Andre Previn's a very good... Oh, he said, listen, I conducted the CBS Symphony at the same time as Toscanini is conducting the NBC. You know, I should have this job. I said, well, for one thing, Andre's a lot younger than you. Don't tell me it's nothing to do with that. Anyway, at that moment, it sort of was announced that, that Andre Previn had got the job, and he was absolutely furious about it.
He was very rude about Andre.
But I said, if you met Andre, actually, you'd love him, and I'm sure it'd be all right.
Very rude about Boulez as well, wasn't he? I remember. He didn't understand Boulez
That's
at all.
not difficult.
I think he would have had more jobs conducting had he been rather better mannered at the cocktail parties and the friend of the orchestra. And
Were they always moments of dread for you, entering a party with him? Were you just like,
No,
did you have to gird yourself?
I got used to it. And I thought, if they don't like him, they don't have to like him. I don't have to go there. Yeah, I was a tough
you were
young
tough,
thing.
yeah.
I was up to it,
Yeah,
yes. But he wouldn't be polite to those ladies, friends of the orchestra or whatever, unless, I mean, he would, if it was about music, he would have a discussion, but he wasn't interested in anything but the music.
Would you say that Taxi Driver was the film that you lived through most, being with him? Or?
Well, Taxi Driver, of course, I went. That was the one, the night he died, after he'd just done that, went over to Hollywood. I wasn't going to go with him.
Yeah.
And then I thought, may as well. Good job I did. After that recording, Larry Cohen and his wife picked us up, and Larry said, oh, I want to show you my next film I want you to do. And after a whole arduous day of recording Taxi Driver, we went to see another film that Larry Cohen wanted him to see. But next day, he was supposed to meet Steven Spielberg. That was Christmas Eve. And of course, he died in the night that night. But Spielberg wanted him, and Martin Scorsese had introduced him, and there was going to be a meeting Christmas Eve.
Bernard Herrmann's often referred to as an innovator. Was that something he was aware of, or was he just pursuing doggedly, his vision? Was he concerned about being someone pushing things on and innovating?
I think he was, because actually, if you look at his activity within the pure world of contemporary music, he spent a great deal of his time pushing the works of Charles Ives, who was not known in America, and his music is very strange, and it's a curious mixture of gospel hymns and marching bands coupled with an extreme atonalism and
collaging as well was an
important part. Mixing up things like two brass bands going in opposite directions, passing in different keys. Amazing stuff like that. He believed that it's important to innovate, to do new things in art. So I think he very definitely did that. So taken apart from his work in film, he was a great promoter of new music of that time, effectively so. And he actually, I believe, paid for an album, or he certainly did an album of the work of Charles Ives. So, and others. And so in my case, he helped me. He was interested in people doing new things, and he did push for new things to happen.
Yeah. It wasn't just new things. He once got a bee in his bonnet about a symphony by Joachim Raff. And he thought this was brilliant, and nobody had ever recorded it. And it was, I think, how many, 2 centuries old or one? It had to be done.
Mid-19th
Had to be done. And he said, I'll pay for it. It's got to be done. Everybody should know this. And totally unselfishly, he thought everybody should know it. And I went to the recording, and in the interval, Benny said to the fixer, the orchestral fixer, "What are they saying? What are they saying?" And the fixer said, "They're saying at this rate they'll have finished by 5:30.
Amazing.
So you can imagine.
Howard, do you see the musical connection between Herrmann and Ives? Can you understand that?
Yes, I think if you look at Benny and his predilection for getting on buses and his wish to be seen as a sort of man of the people, an ordinary person just like reacting to life, I think that's the same sort of thing you get from Charles Ives, who is taking the music of the street, the brass band that is playing, the music that's been heard in a cafe, but actually using it to express something on a higher level. That art should be part of us, which is rather like William Blake's great saying, "Eternity is in love with the productions of the time." I would say that that's a bit, you get that feeling in Charles Ives, and I think it also that Benny would have seen it in doing films. People say, well, film's just like, it's an entertainment thing. It's not, it's an art form. And Benny is saying, I'm treating this seriously. When I write this, I mean it. It's come from here. In the same way as Charles Ives, he fought his whole life to make the money, to spend the time, and then he wrote the music. He really wanted to write. So I can see a lot of correspondences between the two of them. And maybe Charles Ives is very recognized. I would say that Benny's championship of him at that period certainly did a lot to help that to happen. He very much liked American music, but he saw Charles Ives as a sort of being spearheading that movement.
And I think as well,
he was right.
Yeah, I hear a similarity in the way that Charles Ives' music can be quite, dissonant or conflicting. But it has this incredibly human, emotive heart to it, I think.
Well, yes.
It's not just difficult.
Benny would have certainly appreciated you saying that. he wanted his music to have heart.
Yeah.
And so he looked to any music that had heart, but also was expressing something real.
Yeah, because I think he said, you know,
a real emotion.
If it didn't celebrate some aspect of life, it wasn't worth doing. I think Benny said something along those lines.
That's why he wouldn't like Pierre Boulez, if I might say so.
Didn't understand it, yeah. I think he once said that, going back to Hitch, that and perhaps in one of his more critical moments, he said, you know, Hitch only does about 60% of the film and then I finish it. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
That,
Yes.
you know, he might...
Yes, he said, when you said, he said the film is the mosaic, he said that he was the glue that stuck together all the shreds of rock.
The cement or It's like he has to come in and solve whatever problems they've left with the film. Yeah, at that last
Make
minute.
it worth seeing.
We have a time now where he is being very much appreciated in ways that I'm sure he would have loved to have happened during his life. How do you think he would feel?
He would think, about time too. At last they seized heads. He wouldn't think, oh, lucky old me, I've become a fad now. He would think that's just as it should be, but it took them a long time.
Well, Howard, Norma, can't thank you enough for bringing me, as I said at the beginning, this close to the work and life of Bernard Herrmann. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.